everybody! Here we are today exploring the birds around the world, and we are going to Europe today.
Both of these European birds you will find in North America, yet they are not native. They were brought over by the Europeans and have become quite invasive and are actually dominating and killing off our native species here in North America. So although they are beautiful European birds, they are not part of the North American ecosystem.
So along that line, there's a few other birds I wanted to share that are from Europe, but the Europeans brought them over to the Americas, and then they found that actually they were more of a nuisance than a help. One, which you may see quite often, is the European starling. They're all over North America. They're a black bird that kind of has like a greenish purplish tint on their feathers, and they tend to be kind of a nuisance bird. Another one is the house sparrow.
Very annoying.
You know, Alexis, do you want to share what we discovered about the house sparrow a couple years ago? It was kind of sad.
So we had this actually wasn't a real birdhouse. It's just for decoration. Well, the bluebirds moved in and they had a nest. Well, those devil house sparrows decided to take their eggs out and eat the eggs.
And they just let them crack. So yeah, the bluebirds had a nest inside this house, and the house sparrows went right inside their house and took their eggs out and just let them drop right down to the ground. And we were kind of confused by that. So we looked it up, and it turns out the house sparrows are not native to Michigan or North America. The Europeans brought them over thinking, oh, this is a great bird to eat all the insects, so the insects don't eat all the crops.
For that.
Well, no, we have bluebirds for that. Bluebirds also eat bugs. And so what they ended up doing is they actually brought competition over for those poor, sweet little bluebirds. And they're having a hard time trying to nest and be able to have safe homes because the house sparrows keep taking over and destroying their nests. The other bird we're going to talk about today, actually, same thing happened. It's a mute swan. So mute swans are native to Europe, whereas here in North America, we have the trumpeter swan and the tundra swan. Well, what happened was the Europeans, when they came over, they loved their mute swans because they are a beautiful bird. So they brought them over with them. Well, then they started actually fighting with the trumpeter swans and kind of taking over their territory. So now the trumpeter swans are endangered because the mute swans are kind of taking over their area. So it just really goes to show you that God knows best. He knew that the mute swan needed to be in Europe and the trumpeter swan needed to be in North America. So we should have just left it as is. But we're going to learn a little bit more about the mute swan and other swans all around the world. So there are 7 different swans. There's 2 different maps I want to share with you. So this map shows our world here. The yellow is all where the different swans live. Now, something that's kind of interesting is here's our equator here. All the swans that live north of the equator are white. The swans that live south of the equator are black. So Alexis, would you know why that would be? Why do you think the ones that live north of the equator are white?
Probably because there's...
Probably the snow, right? So yeah, the white swans that live north of the equator, they're white so they can blend in with the snow. Whereas the black swans, they tend to blend in with maybe the dark rocks and things like that and the dark colors of the water for camouflage and protection. Here's actually a second map I wanted to share with you, and then we'll go ahead and get out our notebook. So while you get your notebook ready, turn to the right wet page so you can figure out what page we're on today. While you all are getting your notebooks ready, I'm going to share with you another map that really kind of shows some cool stuff too. So this actually shows the pictures of all the different swans we have. I know it's a little harder to see these little squares, but you can see all of these swans here. These are the white swans that live north of the equator. And there's the 2 different kinds of black swans that live south. So there's a black and white one that lives in South America, and then there's a solid black one that lives in Australia. There are no swans in actually Africa or Antarctica, but swans live on every other continent. Now we're going to talk about the mute swan that is native to Europe. There's also a hooper swan that kind of lives in that Eurasia area right between Europe and Asia. And then the tundra and the trumpeter were the 2 that were native to North America. We're on page 43 in your My Animal notebook. And at the top, you have the word birds. You can either change that to European birds, or you can change it to birds of Europe. So if you want to say Europe, that's E-U-R-O-P-E. You can say birds of Europe. And we're going to focus on two today. We've been trying to do two birds on every continent. And the first one is the mute swan. That's pretty easy to actually write. Mute is M-U-T-E. It's that long U, silent E at the end. And then swan is S-W-A-N. Oh, hi, Sarah from Maryland. Good to have you. We're glad that you were able to join us. And in fact, I don't know if there's really any swans that live in Maryland. Could you confirm that with us? Could you let us know? Do you have swans where you live? From what I could understand, there aren't too many swans out east in North America. So I'd love to hear if you have ever seen swans out by where you live. You know, we have the trumpeter swan and the mute swan. We have the tundra swan, but I have not noticed the tundra swan, but it's because it looks so similar to the trumpeter swan. It's just smaller. So I'd love to hear if you have any swans that live out by Maryland. That'd be fun to find out. So on to mute swan. So let's hear a few more things about the mute swan. Here's a great picture here of the mute swan mama with her babies. Now the babies are called cygnets. That's kind of an interesting name for babies, isn't it? So I'll spell that for you too. That's C-Y-N-G-E-T-S. So the babies are cygnets. The mama is also called a pen, and then the daddy's called a cob. So cygnets, isn't that an interesting term for the babies? Oh yes, she has seen swans out there. Oh, that's pretty cool then. You see, all the maps didn't quite show exactly where they were in North America. So you probably also have the trumpeter swans and the mute swans as well. So the mute swans, the way you tell the difference, I'll show you. The mute swan, see how it has that bright orange beak with a little bit of black? So if you see a swan with that bright orange beak and a little bit of black, that is the mute swan. Now the trumpeter swan, which I will show you, nope, this one's also a mute swan. That's got the orange on the beak. Whereas a trumpeter swan, oh, here's some trumpeter swans. Oh no, actually these are the tundras. That's why they look just like the trumpeter. They have solid black beak, but the tundra swans are a little bit smaller. The trumpeters are quite a bit larger. Oh, here's some trumpeter swans here. But as you can see the trumpeter swans, they have a solid black beak. So that's how you can tell the difference. Now those trumpeter swans with the black beak, they are native to North America. Whereas those mute swans that have the orange beak, those were actually brought over from Europe and they're not native. Here's a great picture of a good example of the black swan that lives actually in Australia. So you won't see the black swans north of the equator, all the black ones, and then the one that's in South America is black and white.
It almost looks like the swan has perching feet.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, so we've been learning a lot about the different bird feet. And remember how we learned about the perching feet, how they either have two forward and two back, or they usually have three forward and one back. And then like the woodpeckers and other birds that will go on the side of the tree have two front and two back. But swans, their bone structure here. So the swans will have the three long toes in the front and one short toe in the back. But this is their bone structure. So you can see the reason why they waddle and walk so awkward. Look how far back their legs are and how they're bent backwards. So imagine if your legs were kind of backwards. It's like their knees are sticking out the opposite way. So you'd kind of walk a little awkward as well because they're not really meant for walking long distances. They're graceful in the water. They're meant to live their lives in the water. And they are definitely beautiful swimmers for sure. Oh, I did want to share just a few things about the trumpeter swan because the trumpeter swan, although it's in North America, is the world's largest swan. And so there's just a few things in here that actually talk about the mute swan as well. So you can get a little bit of a good idea of the difference of them because you will probably see both of them. And sometimes they're even in the same lake or the same pond even, you'll see both of them.
Whoa, the trumpeter swan can weigh more than 30 pounds.
Yeah. So the trumpeter swan, they're the world's largest water bird, the trumpeter swan is. But here's something I wanted to share with you too. This is a great map to show where they are in the wild. The red is all their summer homes, and then the purple is their winter homes. They are migrating birds. The yellow is where they'll live year round. So there are a few places that are a little bit more moderate in temperature that will live year round, but most swans will migrate. So like here in Michigan, we don't have any swans right now. It's too cold for them. They tend to kind of go right in the middle of America. Here's a great picture of a mute swan. You see that orange beak, and you see the male is quite a bit larger than the female. And here's a good picture of their webbed foot. So even though they have the three toes forward, they have webbed feet, which are great for swimming. This I thought was a cute picture. Look at them dunking for dinner. So what do you suppose they eat? Does anybody have any good guesses on what the swans eat? They'll eat a lot of the plants. A lot of times they're ducking underwater to get those plants that grow in the ponds and lakes and marshes and rivers even. So plants and like water plants really are their main source of food. So that'd be a good thing to write down. Plants are their main source of food, but they'll also eat insects, snails, and even some small animals. And then if they go on land, they might peck at the grass a little bit too. So what kind of animal are they if they eat plants and animals?
They're,
Remember what that's called?
omnivore.
Omnivore, that's right. So they are omnivores. And so in this little picture where they're bobbing down, you can see they're looking for some delicious plants, or they might be trying to dig up snails. So here it shows here the pen, which is the mama sitting on her eggs, and the cob, the daddy, will sit and guard the nest. So they work together to take care of the babies. And here's the babies. They start off all gray, the cygnets, baby swans. And this was another interesting thing. There's another picture in another book where they have a really strong beak. You can kind of see the grooves and the ridges. So that strong beak with those grooves and ridges is how they can hang on to those fish. Because when you think about it, fish are really slippery, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they need to have grooves and stuff so they can hang on.
One time, I actually held a fish, and it was way too slippery. It just slipped right out of my hands.
Mm-hmm. They will, and that's how, fish are very slippery. So imagine a beak. Beaks are kind of smooth, so the fish would slip right out, wouldn't it?
There's that robin that's back.
Yeah, and we've been watching this robin, and you can see he's really fluffed up. He's got all those air pockets that he's trying to keep his body warm.
I named him Mr. Robber.
Mr. Robber. So we have a Mr. Robber Robin that keeps hanging out our window. So here's a great picture of the adult swan and just the young swan. See how the adult swan is completely white and the young swan is still a little gray. It looks a lot like its parents, but it still has the gray feathers. There's just a few more things we're going to learn about swans, and then we're going to move on to our other European bird. This one's got some really pretty pictures in it. Melissa Gish. You've probably heard that name a couple times. I tend to if I notice that the book is by Melissa Gish, I'll tend to make sure I check that one out from the library. She has beautiful, beautiful pictures. She has a lot of great facts on all sorts of creatures, not just birds. But as we've been doing this journey, I'm noticing, there's a lot of Melissa Gish. She's quite talented. So look at this sweet picture she has of the cygnet. Isn't that adorable? And you can see how it's kind of hiding inside its mama's wing, trying to keep warm. That little gray baby. So it's another thing, if you haven't gotten a chance to write that down, the baby swan is called a cygnet. Cygnet. Here's a cygnet when it's leaving and going on the water for the first time. But still, see, it's a little bit bigger. It's still gray and fluffy. Here's a mute swan here in the corner here. And her babies have just hatched. And the baby birds, when they just hatch, these little cygnets, they're always kind of wet from being inside the egg. So it takes them a little bit to dry off before their fluffy feathers really show too much. Yep, so here's this trumpeter again.
They have black feet.
Yep, they do. They have black feet and
orange.
feet. But you can see their wingspan. It can be more than 10 feet, the trumpeter swan's wingspan. Now, they're bigger than the mute swan, but not that much
taller
bigger.
than Daddy.
That is huge. Again, here's a young cygnet going into the water. So you can tell it's a little bit older. Its neck is getting kind of taller. And then this was another great picture I wanted to share, was the tongue here. So this really shows you a great picture of not only the grooves on their beak, but there's also kind of like little grooves on their tongue. Do you remember how the penguin had all those spikes on its tongue? Here, I'll show you too, Alex. Don't worry, I'll come show you. So their tongue has all those little kind of grooves in it. Not quite such the spikes like the penguin does. Little grooves. See that? Isn't that amazing? So both on their beak and on their tongue, it has those grooves so they can hang on to those fish. And I think that's about what I wanted to show you in this book, because we've got one more. I try to just kind of peek through the books and kind of share a few things here and there, because we could honestly spend hours and hours, days on days, just learning about just swans. So I'm trying to condense it. So we've got one more here. I know it is amazing, isn't it, Sarah? Yeah, they're beautiful, beautiful creatures. And it really is amazing how God made them. This book is by Valerie Bodden, and she's also written a couple of the books we've used as well. So swans are very big birds. There are 7 kinds of swans in the world, but they're all good at flying and swimming, but mostly swimming. They're not so good at walking. They tend to waddle. So that'd be a good fact to write down too if you wanted to, because you want to share some, because we still have one more bird. So if you want to leave some room, like Alexis almost has half her page full. So you probably only have room for one more fact, don't you? So most swans have these beautiful white feathers, but some have black.
Oh, look! In front, it's like an S for swans.
Oh, you're right. That is pretty cool. That is very cool. Swans are the biggest birds that can fly. And if you've ever seen a swan flying, it's a beautiful sight because they are such a large bird, but it's still not quite as beautiful as when they're swimming. There's something about swan swimming that is beautiful, and that's why the Europeans brought the mute swans over, because they're so beautiful when they swim.
But did they actually think about what they were going to do?
I know, they didn't quite think about it. So here's some swans that actually do live in the Arctic areas, but then they migrate during winter time, so they do not stay there year round. So they'll fly to where it's warmer. Here's another cute little picture of them bopping up, eating all the plants underneath the water. So you will find most of their food in shallow water, because it's going to be a lot easier to dunk down. Because when you think about the size of them, they do have long necks, but when you think about the size of them and they have to dunk down, they're still floating on top of the water. So they need to be able to reach the ground of the water to be able to eat delicious water plants. So here's a swan here, and this one you can tell because it's got just the black beak. So is that trumpeter or is that mute swan? Do you remember? It's trumpeter. So the trumpeters have just the black beak. The mute swans have the orange on them as well. Oh, this is a sweet one, and you've probably seen a picture of this too. These are the mute swans. You can see by the orange beak. And look how they've made like a heart with their little necks and their heads. Isn't that sweet? You've probably seen maybe a Valentine card with the 2 swans kind of put together like that. So here is a picture of them flying. They look very different than they do in the water. And they will actually fly a really long distance when they migrate.
Especially Florida?
No, they actually don't migrate all the way to Florida. They'll migrate kind of in the middle of the United States. So they'll come from up by Canada and Alaska. And swans do like to be around other swans. Here's a nice little group of their flock there. So there we are, the wonderful swan. Isn't it wonderful to learn about? Now, swans used to be one of my favorite birds. I love a lot of the birds now. Probably peacock's probably my favorite now. But I've always loved swans too. They're so pretty. We have another bird from Europe that we want to share with you that is quite like a little, I don't know, it's a funny bird, but it's really cute and it's fun to learn about. It's called a puffin. So how many of you have heard about a puffin? Puffins are pretty cute.
Not me.
I know. See, until we started learning about them, she's like, oh, I never even heard of a puffin. So I had a question that I had asked earlier, if there were penguins that lived in the Arctic. Because a lot of people think there are, but are there penguins? No, there are no penguins. All the penguins live south of the equator. But the Arctic does have an adorable little bird that to me is similar to a penguin. Maybe other people wouldn't see that, but I think they kind of look like a penguin, and that's the puffin. Aren't they cute? So puffin's pretty easy to spell too. Puffin, puffin. Oh, and Sarah has she has heard of a puffin. That's wonderful. I'll show you a little bit of a map of where the puffins live. There's 3 kinds of puffins. I always like to see the maps to see where exactly they live. So here's the North Pole and the Arctic Circle. This side's the Atlantic Ocean, where Europe and North America are. Here we have the Pacific Ocean, where we have the edge of North America and Asia over here. So the puffin we're talking about today is the Atlantic puffin that lives all throughout the waters of Europe. Because a puffin does not really spend a lot of time on land besides when they're nesting, laying their eggs and hatching their babies. They tend to spend most of their time in the ocean. So the Atlantic puffin is all around the Atlantic Ocean, around Europe and actually North America. Their primary place I like to be is Iceland, which is an island on the north part of Europe.
Iceland is technically Greenland, and Greenland is technically Iceland.
Right, that was one that they trying to trick people, didn't they?
Don't know why.
Well, I think it's because they wanted to keep the nice land for themselves. They decided, we'll just call it Iceland so people think that it's all full of ice, and Greenland, people think it's green, whereas really the opposite, isn't it? Greenland's full of ice. So what are puffins? Puffins are seabirds. They are birds, but they're seabirds. They can fly through the air and they swim in the ocean. Puffins live in the northern half of the world. They spend most of their lives far from the land. So they tend to be out at sea for the most part, either swimming or flying or resting on the ice. Puffins have large bills and webbed feet. So you can see their little webbed feet. They're bright orange too, and look at their bills. Their bills are so brightly colored as well. Their bills and feet are bright colors in the summer, but the colors are dull the rest of the year. So they have thick bodies with strong muscles, but yet they have short wings. But they do use those wings to both fly, and they're really good swimmers too, and divers. Unlike the penguin, they can fly, but like the penguin, they like to be in the water and they can swim and dive really well. So just like we were talking about with the robin and how we talked about the winter birds and how they kind of fluff themselves up and get those warm air pockets, that's part of how these puffins stay warm. They have these air pockets that they fluff up inside of them and it makes them nice and warm and toasty. But when you think about air, like when you have a floaty in the water, it'd be really hard to dive down in the water if you're all full of air. When they do want to get into the water, they have to kind of release all that air. They kind of push all that air out, so then they can dive down deeper. They can actually dive 100 feet deep. That is pretty deep, isn't it? They love to eat fish. They actually will catch the fish, squid, and other sea animals. Look at his little mouth all full of... He's a hungry little puffin there.
Did you
Look
know,
at that one.
One fact about puffins is that they can actually fit over 60 fish in their mouth.
Right, isn't that cool? On one book, they said the average is usually 10 to 20 fish in their mouth, but scientists have actually discovered them having up to 60 fish in their mouth. That's amazing. You can see, look at these little guys have fish in their mouth too. And that's what they take back to their babies too. Their babies, when they're born, will eat the fish, so they take them back. So they actually do not have a nest. They'll dig out a burrow. So here's this little female puffin in her burrow right there. So just a burrow in the ground, just like what maybe not quite like a chipmunk would use, because chipmunks go underground burrow. These kind of burrows are kind of in the ground or in the rocks. Well, the male and female will take turns going back to the water and bringing fish back for the babies to eat. So again, they both take care of their young. Birds tend to be that way. There's only a few birds that don't have both the mommy and daddy. So here's a great picture too of the puffin flying back with the mouthful of fish for the babies. And there's the puffin there. So with the fish for the baby. So a lot of times when you see a picture of the puffin with fish in its mouth, it's because it's taking it back to the babies. Because the puffin, if they're eating for themselves, they'll just eat while they're underwater. They'll gobble up those fish and they'll just eat them right away. So if you see them in the mouth like that, that just means that they're waiting to take it to the babies. They are good parents. Here's Melissa Gish again. This is what we talked about. She's got some beautiful books. So I'm only going to go over a few with her book. This is the Atlantic puffin, and I wanted to share this picture with you because you can see really well here how there's like this orange pocket on the side of their mouth. And that is it's very stretchy and flexible, so that way they can fit more and more fish. It's kind of bouncy. It's kind of like rubber, so they can just keep packing more and more and more fish into their mouths. And of course, they've got the sharp, strong beak too to hold a lot of fish. I thought that was a great picture to show that little pocket, that orange pocket that they have. These are the sand eels. That's one of their favorite foods, actually, are these little sand eels. They kind of just remind me of like little anchovies or sardines or something. But that's one of their favorite fish is the sand eels. They're actually not true eels, they're fish. Here's another great picture of the Atlantic puffins on their breeding grounds, trying to find a spot for a nest. So sometimes they'll actually reuse their same burrow, but sometimes they'll have to actually dig a new burrow. So are you guys all ready to draw now? I think she's got all sorts of facts written down. Very good.
A few pictures with it.
Oh yeah, so she's got a few examples of like the spikes on the mouth. Good. Going over the puffin facts and kind of helping you learn how to put them into sentences, I'm going to kind of read what Alexis wrote down for her puffins. She wrote they can fly and that they are carnivores. They live in the Arctic. They can dive 100 feet and they can carry up to 60 fish. So those are all great facts. So if we wanted to put them together, as you're making your report, you always want to kind of start off with a bang. Start off with something really interesting. You want to have people interested in what you're writing about. What do you think is the most interesting fact that you wrote down? Maybe the carrying the fish? So maybe you could even start off the report Did you know that a puffin can fit almost 60 fish in their beak? That might be a fun way to start. And then you could go on to say that puffins are carnivores and they mostly eat fish and squid. And you could kind of go on to more details on what they would eat. Now, another interesting thing that actually we read in a different book that wasn't in these books was that they're about the size of a chicken, but they only lay one egg, very similar to the emperor penguin, but it's not quite as large as that kiwi. How the kiwi only was about the size of a chicken, only laid one egg, but their egg was really, really big. Right. Whereas the puffin is about the size of a chicken and their egg is, maybe 3 times the size of the chicken egg, right? Something like that. So that's another interesting fact as well. So as you're writing your reports and kind of gathering information, you want to start with something really, really interesting, something that's really amazing about the animal, and then continue on with that paragraph, kind of saying more facts on that same subject. So if you start off with that they can have 60 fish in their mouth, talk about what they like to eat. Or if you start off that they can dive 100 feet, then maybe you could also talk about that they spend most of their lives on the water and not the land. So you always want to group your facts together for different paragraphs. So I know that you're all probably trying to figure out what bird you want to use for your report. You want to get probably about 5 books on whatever bird that you're going to choose. And I'm curious to know too, what bird is everyone at home going to choose for their own report? And we're going to try to maybe do a live video where we maybe bring some people on to share some facts about their birds. So be thinking about what you want to do for your bird report. We only have 2 more weeks after this of birds. Go ahead and get out your notebook, or if it's just a piece of paper, or like I have my solid white notebook, and we're going to go ahead and draw 2 very different birds. We're going to draw the puffin and we're going to draw the swan. So I'm going to flip you guys over here. All right, here we go. So here, look at how she's got so many facts here about the mute swan here. She has all her facts about the puffin, and she even has a few little diagrams. So now we're going to work on the white side, or if you just have your own paper that you're going to use. I'm finding that actually I'm kind of liking to turn my paper this way, I've noticed. For the birds, it seems like it's actually worked out better. And this way I can kind of maybe make the water so the birds can be on the water, because both the swan and the puffin tend to be in the water, although they're not actually in the same water. They're not in the same habitat, as swans actually prefer the fresh water. And puffins are in salt water. So they're in 2 different kinds of water. I'm just going to draw them both on the water. So first we can start with our beautiful swan. Now the swan, as you saw, kind of has a little bit of an S shape to their neck. So we kind of start with their head here, make a little bit of an S shape, and then they kind of come up here, and then with their tails. And then you've got a rather large body here. And then their head here. And because we're doing the mute swan, remember, we're going to actually have the orange on their beaks. So the mute swan has a little bit of a black bump here, and then their beak. And it's a longer beak too, because it's meant for catching the fish and stuff. So here we go. So I'm just going to actually kind of shade this in dark. And then actually, Alexis, when you get a chance, can you grab the colored pencils? I forgot them, because these are another bird that actually is kind of nice to color them, because there's not a lot of coloring that goes on with them. So there's their single eye, and then they've got huge feathers, or huge wings, I should say, and huge feathers, really. There we go. So here is our mute swan here. I'm going to draw the water up around her a little bit more too. So there's our beautiful little mute swan. So we're going to label her mute swan. And in a little bit, we'll go ahead and color her beak orange, because that's the huge difference between the mute swan. The trumpeter swan would have all black for her. Oh, good. Thank you, Alexis. I just need the orange, actually. Okay. So here we go. The mute swan just has this bright orange beak. So it's pretty easy to color these guys, because they don't have a lot of color on them, do they? So Alexis and I, we wore our black and white today to represent these both creatures that don't have a lot of coloring. So there's our mute swan. And now on this side, let's go ahead and draw our puffin. So I'm going to move this over a little bit, because I had a really good picture here I wanted to copy with the puffin. Because the puffin, there's a few very distinct factors on it. It's got such a pointed triangle-shaped beak. It's got that very distinct white and black on its body. And then short legs. So unlike the penguin, it has a little bit of a longer leg. Not too long though. Not like the swans are much longer for sure. Of course, the book doesn't want to stay open for me. There we go. Maybe that'll work. That'll work. Okay, so now let's go ahead and draw our puffin. So he's going to be a little bit smaller. Remember, the swans are up to 20 pounds. The trumpeters are. And then the mute swans are, I believe, up to about 16 or so pounds. Whereas this sweet little puffin is only about 2 pounds or less. So we're going to draw him quite a bit smaller here. Or you know what we could do? We could draw him on some ice. Let's draw him on a little ice chunk here. So we're going to draw a little puffin up here. So we're going to start with his head. Then he kind of has like a tear-shaped body a little bit. And shorter legs. And remember those webbed feet. So this way we can kind of draw the feet as well, since he's up on an iceberg. And then he's got his wing here. Smaller wings, but still good for flying and everything. And he's got like the white belly and a little bit of the white bottom. So we're going to kind of separate that here with the dark, whereas his wing is all dark like his feathers here. And both the puffin and the mute swan, they both also preen. Alexis, do you remember what that means to preen?
It means to oil their feathers.
Right. So all birds have an oil gland at the base of their feathers. And it's meant for, I'm going to do this little orange pocket there too that they have. They have like a little orange pocket that I remember that I showed you that is like rubber so they can fit more fish. So yes, they preen. So preen just means like at the base of their tail right here, or on the swan it'd be right here. At the base of their tail, they have an oil gland. And that oil gland will produce, it always will produce oil. And so the birds will kind of just put their beak down there and kind of peck at it to kind of get the oil to come out. Almost like a bottle of lotion, how you put the, put your hand down to get on the dispenser to get the lotion out. Well, it's the same thing. They kind of push their beaks down of their oil gland dispenser and they can oil up their feathers. It helps them be waterproof. And that also, but even the birds that don't really go in the water also have that oil gland because it helps them be waterproof even in the rain or anything. So there's all his little black feathers. He kind of looks like a dodo bird the way I drew the beak a little bit, doesn't he? So they kind of have, they have a little bit of black marking on their beak. And then they also have a little bit almost like orange and red and yellow. So I'm going to draw that little pocket there tends to be orange. And then I'm going to draw just a couple, it's almost striped looking a little bit. So we're going to draw like an orange stripe here. And then we're going to draw a little bit of yellow on their beaks as well. And they've actually have been called, what kind of parrot were they called? The Arctic parrot, maybe? They had some sort of a name like an Arctic parrot or something like that. Just because they have a little bit of a look of a parrot, but they are not in the parrot family. Parrots are very much tree birds and perching birds, and they love to eat fruit and nuts and nectar and things like that, whereas the puffin is a carnivore, eating the fish and everything. Oh, and they have the bright orange webbed feet that we should color too. So they definitely are nothing like a parrot, but they have a little bit of a look of a parrot. So that's where they get that nickname, the Arctic parrot. Oh, look at our adorable little puffin. So we're going to label our puffin Puffin. And there's our puffin. And there is our mute swan. And there they are. Aren't they adorable? So we hope you had fun learning about the birds of Europe and drawing the birds of Europe. And next week, we've got only 2 more weeks. So next week, we're actually going to go to Africa to learn about some pretty cool birds there. And the following week, we'll be at South America. So we'd love to hear too. I want you to be thinking about what bird you're going to use for your report. So let us know what bird you're going to be using. Alexis is going to be working on the cardinal, so she'll share some cardinal facts, right, as we go through the cardinals. And we're glad you joined us today. Bye. Thanks for watching. They may be at zoos a lot of times. They can be at a zoo. It looks like we have a really big glare on us here. Whoops. There we go. I think I got the glare off. All of a sudden, the light started shining really bright. I think because there's so much snow outside, it's like shining in our window. Kind of acts like a little bit of a
There's
reflector.
so much snow here that literally I had to dig like a maze for Polly to go out for potty.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of snow. So I know a lot of people in America, even down south, have gotten a decent amount of snow.
Even
So
Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia.
yep. Also, there's snow kind of everywhere. So we'd love to hear too how much snow everybody has. That'd be kind of fun since we're talking about the Arctic and the
Wonder if
snow.
Florida has some snow.
I don't know if they got any snow in Florida though. I don't know if it quite went that far down, but there definitely has been a lot of snow.
Because there's like over a foot of snow here.
Mm-hmm.